I never thought I'd end up back in this garage. The smell of engine oil thick in the air, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like a bad song you can't switch off. But there I was, leaning against the edge of a counter, watching her move between workbenches with that effortless confidence that always made me feel like I was intruding on a world I didn't belong to. Her name is Victoria. She's older, mid-40s, I think. But there's a lightness in the way she carries herself, a sort of casual elegance that makes the cluttered workshop feel almost orderly. Today, she's wearing a gray work shirt rolled up at the sleeves, smudges of grease on her hands, hair loosely pinned back. I remember thinking, years ago, how different she looked in a black dress at some family gathering, and how that memory had stuck with me longer than it probably should have. I'm not supposed to be here. Not really. The last time we crossed paths, it was awkward in the best and worst ways. A brush of hands over a toolbox, a laugh that didn't quite mask the tension, the sudden, unplanned weight of his arms around me. Stepbrother. That word still tastes bitter and sweet all at once. But now, watching her inspect an engine part with sharp eyes and that faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips, I feel that old spark flicker again, soft but persistent. She glances up, and our eyes meet for a fraction too long. My chest tightens in a way that's both thrilling and terrifying. I try to look away, busying my hands with a rag I didn't need, but I catch her watching me too. There's something in her gaze, maybe curiosity, maybe recognition, maybe just patience, but it feels deliberate, like she's testing the boundaries without ever saying a word. "Did you double-check the torque on this?" she asks, her voice calm but precise, cutting through the hum of machinery. Yeah," I reply too quickly. My voice sounds small, even to me. I'm suddenly hyper-aware of how close I am, of the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the garage's grit. She laughs, a soft, teasing sound, and shakes her head. "Careful," she says. "You always rush." I feel a rush of embarrassment, but also something else, something sticky and lingering, like the air right before a storm. I want to ask her why she remembers all these little things about me, why her attention feels different than anyone else's. But the words die in my throat, and we both return to the engine, pretending, acting normal. Then it happens. She brushes her hand against mine, deliberately, or maybe accidentally. I'll never know. And the static between us is undeniable. Neither of us pulls away immediately, caught in that fleeting, suspended moment. My stomach twists, my fingers tingle, and I swear the world outside the garage ceases to exist. I shouldn't be thinking about this. I shouldn't want it. And yet, I can't stop thinking about it. About her. About that hand lingering against mine. About the quiet electricity in the space between us that I can't name but can't ignore. Even as she turns back to her work, humming a line from a song I don't know, I feel it again. The memory, the ache, the impossibility of pretending that nothing is there. And for the first time in a long time, I wonder if some sparks are meant to be felt twice. I found myself back in the garage the next morning, drawn by some quiet, unexplainable gravity. She was there already, sleeves rolled higher, hair pinned up with a few loose strands framing her face. The early sunlight slanted through the high windows, catching the dust in the air like tiny golden motes, and for a second, the place felt suspended between ordinary and electric. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced up, eyes narrowing slightly, not in annoyance. Exactly, more like caution. "Didn't think you'd come back," she said, her tone even measured. There was something in her posture, a slight stiffening at the shoulders, that made me realize she was guarding herself. I couldn't help noticing the faint crease at the edge of her eyes, the subtle tension in her jaw. For someone so composed, she carried a quiet vulnerability in these little ways. We worked side by side in silence at first, repairing a stubborn engine. I watched her hands, calloused at the tips, precise and careful, yet carrying a faint tremor that betrayed exhaustion. A loose curl fell from her hair, and she brushed it back with one hand, smudging a streak of grease across her cheek. I wanted to point it out, to laugh softly, to tell her she didn't have to be perfect all the time. But I stayed quiet, letting the observation simmer into a deeper awareness of her. She glanced at me once, briefly, when a bolt slipped from her grip. Her laugh was soft, almost apologetic, a little crack in her armor. "Clumsy today," she said, shrugging like it was nothing. But the way her shoulders sagged hinted at something else, fatigue, or maybe something heavier. I wanted to reach for her hand, just to steady her, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned closer, pretending to examine the engine, and noticed the faint lines of worry on her forehead, the way her lips pressed together when she was thinking. Every small gesture became a language I was desperate to read. "Here," I said finally, handing her a wrench. Our fingers brushed, lightly, almost imperceptibly, but the spark in that instant felt louder than the machinery around us. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she lingered, a slight pause in her breath, like she felt it too, but wasn't ready to name it. I caught a glimpse of her eyes meeting mine for a fraction too long. She looked away quickly, hiding whatever flicker of something unspoken had passed between us. I could see the restraint in her posture, the quiet caution she wore like armor. And yet, beneath it, there was a trace of something more, an unacknowledged desire, a curiosity she wouldn't voice aloud. I swallowed hard, trying to tamp down the sudden surge in my chest. She returned to the engine, hands busy again, but the air between us had shifted, charged, heavy with the weight of all the things we hadn't said. Before I left, I leaned against the doorway, watching her straighten, stretch, and wipe her hands on a rag. She paused mid-motion, just long enough for me to catch the tired pull at the corners of her eyes, the faint tremor of her shoulders letting slip the guard she maintained so carefully. Then she looked at me, really looked, and smiled, just the tiniest curve of her lips, fragile and fleeting. And I realized I would spend the rest of the day thinking about that smile, about the way it barely touched the surface of her defenses, and how desperately I wanted to see what lay underneath. If you want, I can move on to part 3, where we deepen the tension further and explore her subtle invitation and his growing obsession. Do you want me to continue with that? I wasn't supposed to notice it, but I did. She had a way of moving through the garage that drew my attention without trying. How her fingers lingered over the metal, the tilt of her head as she considered a stubborn bolt. I leaned against the counter, pretending to be absorbed in paperwork, but my eyes kept drifting. Each glance felt dangerous, like standing too close to a live wire. Yet I couldn't stop myself. She noticed, of course. I could see the flicker in her eyes, the subtle tightening of her jaw when our gazes met. It wasn't annoyance, not exactly, but an unspoken warning. And yet, there was something softer there too, a hesitation that made me wonder if she was as aware of the tension as I was. "You're quiet today," she said finally, voice low and precise. "Just thinking," I replied, avoiding her eyes. My stomach tightened when she tilted her head, studying me, like she was trying to read the unspoken thoughts I'd never share. We worked in silence after that, and I noticed everything. The faint crease between her brows when she concentrated, the way her shoulders slumped just slightly when she exhaled, the soft hum she made when something clicked into place. Every micro-movement was a message, a language I was desperate to understand. At one point, she stretched and yawned quietly, rubbing her temple. I caught a hint of exhaustion, maybe frustration, and instinctively offered a rag to wipe her hands. Our fingers brushed, lingering longer than necessary. I felt it, the electricity, subtle but undeniable, and she froze, just for a moment, before accepting it without a word. "Thanks," she said softly, almost inaudible, and I realized that even a single word from her could set my chest on fire. She returned to her work, but the air between us had thickened, charged with all the things neither of us dared say. Later, I watched her lean over the engine, sunlight catching her hair. I wanted to tell her something, anything, but my words tangled in my throat. She sensed it, I think, because she straightened abruptly, as if aware of the gravity of a glance too long or a heartbeat too loud. When she looked at me one last time before I left, her eyes held a softness, a flicker of something she didn't quite name. I wanted to step forward, to reach out, to close the impossible distance between us, but instead, I nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat, and walked away. And yet, Walking out the door, I couldn't shake the image of her hands brushing against mine, the subtle curve of her smile, the way she looked at me and didn't look away completely. I kept replaying it in my head, over and over, like a song I couldn't stop humming. Some sparks, I realized, are not meant to be ignored, even when the fire feels forbidden. The garage was quiet in a way that made every creak of metal and drip of oil feel amplified. We had been working side by side for hours, neither of us speaking much, and yet the silence between us carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. She straightened suddenly, wiping her hands on a rag, and I realized she had been watching me more than I had noticed. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the space where words could have been, and I felt my chest tighten as if the air itself were conspiring to hold us captive. Finally, she broke it. Her voice was low, cautious, almost fragile. "What are we doing?" I froze. The question hung there, raw and jagged, cutting through the rhythm of our work. I wanted to joke, to deflect, to pretend it was nothing, but the gravity in her eyes made that impossible. She wasn't asking lightly. She was asking because she needed to know if I felt it too, the pull we were trying so hard to ignore. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely more than a whisper. I thought maybe it was just me. Her shoulders sagged slightly, a hint of relief or disappointment. I couldn't tell which. She ran a hand through her hair, exposing the faint line of tension at her temples, and I felt a pang of guilt for wanting to reach out and touch her anyway, for wanting to lean into the forbidden gravity that had been building between us for weeks. She didn't move closer, didn't step back. She just looked at me, and the intensity in her gaze was almost unbearable. I wanted to say something, anything that could make this less complicated, but my words stuck, heavy and useless in my throat. We worked silently after that, but the air had changed. Every glance carried weight. Every brush of hands felt monumental. The quiet was no longer comfortable. It was a mirror, reflecting everything we were refusing to name. At one point, I caught her exhaling sharply, a sound that betrayed more than her composed exterior ever let on. I wanted to ask her if she was okay, but the fear of what the answer might be kept me still. Instead, I watched her move, noticing the way her fingers trembled slightly as she tightened a bolt, the faint shadow of exhaustion beneath her eyes. When I finally stepped back to leave, she didn't look away. Our eyes met, and I saw everything she was holding in. The uncertainty, the tension, the unspoken pull between us. Then she whispered, almost to herself, almost to me, "I can't keep pretending this is normal." And just like that, the garage, the tools, the engines, they all faded. All that existed was the weight of that confession, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, that nothing between us would ever feel ordinary again. It was late when I found her sitting on the steps outside the garage, the air cool against her skin, and the fading sunlight catching her hair in a way that made her seem almost fragile. She wasn't waiting for anyone, not really. She just looked like she needed to be somewhere quiet, alone with herself, and somehow, I felt compelled to stay. "Mind if I sit?" I asked, keeping my distance. She shook her head, a small, tired smile tugging at her lips. "No, it's fine." We didn't speak at first. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves and a distant car passing by. Then, quietly, almost as if she were confessing to the dusk itself, she said, "I wasn't always like this. Confident, I mean. There was a time when I let someone in, completely, and it ended with me feeling hollow. I never wanted to feel that again." Her hands rested loosely on her knees, trembling slightly in the cool evening. I noticed how she avoided my gaze, staring at a crack in the concrete like it held all the answers. I wanted to reach for her, to offer comfort, but I stayed still, letting her words land softly between us. She hesitated, then swallowed. "I don't know if I can trust myself anymore." Something in my chest tightened. I knew that feeling. Loss, regret, fear, but hearing it come from her, the woman who always seemed so in control, shook me. I wanted to tell her that not all doors are meant to stay closed, that some things are worth the risk, but I couldn't find the right words. Then I remembered something, a photograph she'd once absent-mindedly left on the workbench. I pulled it from my pocket, careful not to make it seem deliberate. It was small, edges curling, a picture of her, younger, with a man whose presence seemed to haunt her even in stillness. I saw this once, I murmured, handing it to her. Is he? She took it, fingers brushing mine, and her lips pressed together, a fragile shield over the rush of memories. He was everything I thought I'd ever need, she said softly. Until he wasn't. We sat in silence for a long time, letting the weight of the past press against the quiet. I could see it in her eyes, the echo of loss, the hesitation, the tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. And yet, there was also a flicker, a fragile spark, like the smallest candle trying to light a room that had been dark for too long. When she finally looked up at me, her gaze was steady, searching, not for answers, not for comfort, just acknowledgement. And in that moment, the air shifted. Something unspoken passed between us, a shared recognition of pain, of longing, of possibility. She exhaled slowly, a whisper more felt than heard. I'm not sure I know how to do this right. And I realized I didn't need to fix it. I just needed to be there, present in the pause, in the quiet, in the ache. And that was enough to make the world feel suddenly, terrifyingly alive. The garage smelled faintly of oil and evening air, the kind of quiet that settles over a place when the day's chaos is past. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, staring at some engine part as if it could answer all the questions that neither of us had dared speak aloud. I didn't move immediately. I didn't want to break the fragile rhythm we had built. You're quiet, she said finally, not a challenge, just an observation. I've been listening, I admitted. My voice sounded small, almost swallowed by the space between us. She glanced at me, and I saw it. The faint exhale of relief, the easing of shoulders, the tiniest curve of a smile that wasn't for anyone but me. No words were necessary after that. We both knew what had been simmering beneath the surface, the tension that had grown in pauses, glances, and accidental touches. We worked side by side, methodically, almost ceremoniously, letting our hands brush over tools, over parts, over nothing at all, each small contact carrying weight. When I passed her a wrench, our fingers lingered a moment longer than required. I felt her subtle acknowledgement, and in response, I let my hand rest lightly against hers, an understanding, not a demand. We didn't speak for a while. The silence was soft, not heavy, a gentle kind of presence that only comes when two people have finally stopped pretending. I noticed the faint line of tension at her jaw, how her eyes softened as they met mine, the way she exhaled slowly, a tiny surrender that didn't need words. I moved closer, careful, watching, waiting. She didn't pull away. Our space shrank naturally, like gravity had decided we belonged together in that quiet corner of the garage. Her hair brushed my shoulder when she leaned to inspect a bolt, and I caught the faint scent, warm, familiar, grounding. And then, as if on instinct, we settled side by side on the worn steps outside, the sun dipping low and painting everything gold. I didn't say anything. She didn't either. Our hands found each other again, fingers entwining almost accidentally, and the world seemed to narrow to the simplicity of that contact. No declarations, no promises, just the quiet affirmation of presence, of choice, of shared understanding. I tilted my head slightly, noticing her forehead brushing lightly against mine. A shiver of recognition passed through both of us. We had survived hesitation, boundaries, fear, and yet here we were, together in this simple, human way. The pull that had haunted me for months now felt like inevitability, and she was as present as I was, equally aware of the weightless gravity between us. For the first time in a long time, I let myself breathe. Not relief, not victory, just presence. She exhaled into my shoulder, and we stayed like that, silent, still, unspoken, until the last light faded behind the garage roof. And it was enough. I think about that evening more than I probably should. The garage, the steps, the sun falling just so. It's etched in my memory like a photograph that refuses to fade. Not because anything spectacular happened, but because everything did. The quiet moments, the glances, the touches that weren't bold or dramatic. They were real. They were ours. She's different now, not because she changed, but because the weight she carried alone is lighter. I see it in her laugh, the ease in her movements, the softness in her eyes when she looks at me without pretense. And me? I've learned how to listen, not just to her, but to the spaces between words, the silences that carry more meaning than anything spoken aloud. I've learned that desire can exist without frenzy, that longing doesn't have to be loud to be urgent. We don't need labels, declarations, or perfect timing. Love, I think, isn't a climax or a confetti-filled scene. It's the steady presence of someone who knows the shape of your quiet moments and still chooses to stay. It's in the subtle gestures, the shared understanding, the comfort of simply being without pretending. I catch myself smiling at random times, remembering the brush of her fingers against mine, the way her hair fell across her face, the tiny exhale that felt like surrender. And I realize that what we have now, it's earned, fragile, and impossible to replicate. That tension that once made my chest ache has softened into something warmer, something that hums quietly beneath our days. Sometimes we still work in silence, side by side, letting the tools and engines occupy the space between us. And sometimes, just sometimes, she will glance up, smile faintly, and I feel the pull of everything unspoken, the magnetism, the longing, the years of restrained desire, all condensed into one fleeting, perfect moment. It hasn't been a perfect story. There are still pauses, still hesitation, still memories that sting. But the truth is, I wouldn't trade any of it. The slow burn, the uncertainty, the quiet collapse into understanding, it made us who we are together. So, when I look back, I don't see temptation, guilt, or impossibility. I see growth, connection, and the kind of love that doesn't need to announce itself to the world to matter. I see her, and I see me, finally willing to let myself stay in the same space without running, without fear, without pretending. And if you're still here, listening to me recount all of this, maybe you've felt it too. The pull of someone who changes everything by simply existing in your orbit. Maybe you've waited, wondered, and hoped for something quietly inevitable. I guess all I can say is, don't ignore the sparks. Some are meant to burn slowly, and some, once felt, never really go out.